There is a face humanity has been drawing for thousands of years. Sometimes it has wings, sometimes horns, sometimes the body of a serpent, the claws of a bird, or the teeth of a predator. It waits outside the walls of ancient cities. It whispers inside royal courts. It enters dreams, spreads disease, tempts, challenges prophets, and appears whenever human beings try to explain why suffering exists. Its name changes. In ancient Mesopotamia, it could be Lamashtu, stalking mothers and newborn children. In Egypt, it could be Apophis, the serpent of chaos attempting to swallow the sun. In Persia, it became the hostile spirit, the enemy of truth and creation. In Buddhist stories, it appeared as Mara, the force that tried to stop awakening. In the Islamic tradition, it was Iblis, the proud being who refused a divine command. In Christianity, it became Satan, the great adversary, tempter, deceiver, and enemy of God. It's different civilizations, different languages, different continents. Yet again and again, humanity imagined an intelligence behind darkness. Why? Why did societies separated by deserts, mountains, oceans, and centuries create supernatural beings associated with suffering, temptation, disorder, and evil? Did they all preserve fragments of the same forgotten encounter? Did the image of the devil spread from one ancient civilization to another, changing its name as it traveled? Or is the explanation more unsettling? Perhaps the devil did not first appear in a temple, a scripture, or a vision. Perhaps it appeared inside the human mind. To begin this investigation, we must first confront a misleading idea. It is often said that every civilization believed in the devil. Historically, that is not quite true. Many cultures had no single ruler of evil, no fallen angel commanding an army of demons, and no supernatural enemy equal to the gods. What they had instead were dangerous spirits, restless dead, tricksters, monsters, forces of chaos, and invisible beings blamed for disease or disaster. The devil, as many people imagine him today, is not one universal character found unchanged throughout history. He is a collection. He is the result of thousands of years of human fears being combined, separated, renamed, moralized, and retold. And that distinction changes the entire investigation. The real mystery is not why every civilization believed in the same devil. They did not. The real mystery is why so many civilizations felt compelled to give evil a face. Our earliest written evidence brings us to Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Furat rivers, where some of the first cities rose from the mud of the ancient world. This was a place of extraordinary human achievement. Writing, organized law, monumental architecture, long-distance trade, mathematics, and astronomy developed there. But life in those cities was precarious. Rivers that nourished the fields could also destroy them. Infections could spread without warning. Crops failed, died young. A fever could take a healthy person in days. A storm could erase months of labor. The causes of many disasters were invisible. When the world harms you and you cannot see why, the unseen becomes a suspect. Mesopotamian texts describe numerous supernatural beings connected with illness, nightmares, polluted places, wilderness, wind, and death. They were not all part of one organized kingdom of evil. Some operated like destructive forces of nature. Others appeared to act with intention. They could enter houses, attack sleepers, threaten pregnant women, or bring unexplained sickness. One of the most feared was Lamashtu. Ancient images portray her as a terrifying hybrid being. She was associated with dangers surrounding pregnancy, childbirth, and infancy, moments when families were especially vulnerable and medical understanding was limited. To a modern observer, the belief may seem irrational, but imagine the emotional world in which it developed. A mother survives pregnancy, a child is born. For several days, everything appears normal, then the infant becomes weak. There is no microscope, no germ theory, no hospital laboratory, and no medical explanation. The family sees only an invisible attack. Grief demands a cause, and when no human cause can be found, a supernatural attacker becomes psychologically possible. But the Mesopotamian response contained a strange paradox. To defend against Lamashtu, people sometimes used images of another terrifying being, Pazuzu, the king of destructive wind demons. Pazuzu was associated with dangerous winds believed to carry illness and devastation. His surviving images combine human and animal features into something deliberately unnatural. Wings, claws, a snarling face, and other threatening characteristics. Yet amulets bearing his head were used for protection, especially against Lamashtu. One demon was called upon to repel another. The frightening figure was not merely worshipped or feared, it was used like a weapon. This is one of the first major clues in our investigation. In ancient Mesopotamia, supernatural beings did not always fit into a clean division between absolute good and absolute evil. Pazuzu could represent destructive power, while also protecting a household from something considered even more dangerous. The same image could inspire fear and provide comfort. Evil was not yet a single empire. It was a hazardous ecosystem of forces that could sometimes be turned against one another. That complexity is important because modern audiences often look backward through the lens of later religion. We see a monstrous face and immediately call it the devil. But the people who created that face may have understood it very differently. For the supernatural world reflected the uncertainty of the natural world. A river could give life and take it. Fire could warm a home or destroy it. Wind could cool the air or carry a deadly storm. A supernatural being associated with nature could therefore be protective in one context and destructive in another. The earliest demons were not always philosophers of evil. Sometimes they were explanations for danger. This pattern appears again in ancient Egypt, but in a different form. Every night, according to Egyptian religious imagination, the sun entered the underworld. Its journey through darkness was threatened by Apophis, a vast serpent associated with chaos. Apophis was the enemy of the solar order, the force attempting to prevent the sun from rising again. The struggle was cosmic, but it was not the same as the later Christian idea of Satan. Apophis did not primarily appear as a tempter persuading individual humans to commit moral sins. He symbolized the destruction of order itself. He represented the return of the universe to darkness, instability, and formlessness. The Egyptian religious world was deeply concerned with maintaining balance. Order was not something that could be taken for granted. It had to be renewed through ritual, justice, kingship, and divine action. Each sunrise was evidence that chaos had failed again, yet its defeat was never permanent. The serpent would return the next night. This created a vision of evil not as an independent kingdom that would eventually overthrow creation, but as a permanent threat surrounding creation. Order existed, but disorder pressed against its borders. Egyptian rituals could include symbolic attacks on images of Apophis. The goal was not merely to tell a dramatic myth. Ritual action helped participants believe they were assisting in the preservation of the cosmos. The universe survived because divine and human beings resisted chaos together. The British Museum describes Apophis as the enemy of the sun god and a symbol of primeval chaos. That description captures a crucial difference between kinds of evil. Apophis was not simply a criminal within the universe. He was the possibility that the universe might stop functioning as an ordered place. Here, the face of evil emerged from one of humanity's oldest fears. Not merely that we will suffer, but that the structure holding reality together may collapse. Floods, eclipses, droughts, political rebellion, disease, and invasion could all seem like cracks in the wall separating order from chaos. By personifying chaos, ancient people made it possible to resist. A force without a face is difficult to confront. A serpent can be named, it can be depicted, it can be struck in ritual, it can be defeated in a story. The danger remains, but it becomes imaginable, and what can be imagined can sometimes be endured. As we move westward into the Greek world, the investigation becomes even more complicated because the word that eventually gave English its term daimon did not originally mean what it means today. The Greek daimon could refer to a divine or spiritual power, an intermediary presence, a distributor of fate, or a guiding force. It was not automatically evil. Some daimons could be protective. In Hesiodic tradition, the dead of a legendary golden age could become guardians who watched over human beings. The word carried mystery, but not necessarily moral corruption. Ancient Greek religion also lacked one single sacred book defining every god, spirit, and supernatural being. Traditions varied by city, period, poet, and ritual community. The gods themselves could behave in ways that modern readers would consider jealous, deceptive, violent, generous, protective, or unpredictable. The moral universe was not divided into one perfectly good side and one perfectly evil side. Fate could be terrible without being demonic. A god could punish without becoming the devil. A spirit could bring misfortune without leading a rebellion against heaven. The later transformation of daemon into demon, meaning an evil spirit, reminds us that words can preserve the shell of an old concept while completely changing what lives inside it. This transformation raises a larger question. When did dangerous spirits become moral enemies? When did supernatural evil stop being merely a force that caused sickness, storms, nightmares, or bad fortune and become an intelligence that opposed truth, goodness, and divine order itself? One of the most important answers leads to ancient Iran and the religious tradition associated with Zoroaster, or Zarathustra. The exact dates of Zoroaster's life remain debated. Scholars have proposed different periods, and the surviving texts developed across long stretches of time. But the religious tradition connected with him introduced one of history's most influential visions of cosmic moral conflict. At its center was a struggle between truth and falsehood, order and destruction, the beneficent creation associated with Ahura Mazda, and the hostile activity associated with Angra Mainyu, later known in Middle Persian tradition as Ahriman. Here, evil was no longer simply dangerous. It was morally opposed to the good. Angra Mainyu was the hostile spirit connected with deception, corruption, impurity, and forces that damage creation. Later Zoroastrian traditions described a cosmic conflict in which evil would ultimately be defeated and creation renewed. Human beings were not passive spectators. Their choices mattered. Truthful speech, right action, ritual purity, and moral loyalty placed a person within the struggle. To lie was not merely to break a social rule. It was to participate in the destructive principle operating against the order of creation. This was an enormous development. The battlefield moved into ordinary human conduct. A person's words could strengthen truth or falsehood. A decision could serve creation or corruption. Morality became cosmic. The scholarly record also demands caution. Zoroastrian ideas changed over time, and the relationship between the oldest hymns and later systematic dualism is complex. Encyclopedia Iranica notes that the concept of Ahriman did not remain unchanged across the centuries. The surviving evidence is not a single frozen doctrine delivered in one moment, but the central pattern is unmistakable. Evil had become organized into a spiritual opposition with universal significance. This leads to one of the most debated questions in the history of religion. Did Persian ideas influence later Jewish and Christian concepts of Satan, demons, final judgment, and cosmic warfare? The Persian Empire conquered Babylon in the 6th century BCE, bringing Jewish communities into prolonged contact with Persian political and religious culture. Later Jewish writings contain increasingly developed ideas about hostile spiritual beings, angelic conflict, judgment, resurrection, and the battle between light and darkness. The resemblance has led many scholars to propose influence, but resemblance is not proof of simple borrowing. Religious ideas do not move like sealed objects from one culture to another. They are translated, resisted, reinterpreted, and combined with existing traditions. Jewish thought already possessed stories of chaos, forbidden beings, divine judgment, adversaries, and heavenly councils. Persian concepts may have provided new language or structure, but the exact pathways remain debated. The most responsible conclusion is not that Zoroastrianism invented the Christian devil. It is that ancient cultures interacted and their ideas evolved within shared historical worlds. The devil has a genealogy, but it is not a straight family tree. It is a web. To understand the next transformation, we must examine one of history's most understood words, Satan. In the Hebrew Bible, the word did not initially function as the personal name of God's supreme enemy. Its basic meaning was adversary, opponent, or accuser. It could describe human opposition. It could even describe an angelic figure standing in someone's path. In the book of Job, the figure usually translated as Satan is Ha-Satan, the accuser or the adversary. He appears within the heavenly court. He does not invade heaven from an independent kingdom. He does not defeat the guards. He does not claim to be equal to God. He challenges the motives of a righteous man named Job. Job, he argues, is faithful because his life is protected and prosperous. Remove the protection and his loyalty may collapse. The story is disturbing precisely because the accuser operates within permitted limits. He is not yet the fully developed devil of later Christian imagination. He resembles a prosecutor testing the credibility of human righteousness. A similar role appears in the book of Zechariah, where the accuser stands ready to bring charges. This early figure is dangerous, but he belongs to the system. he is not yet the ruler of an opposing cosmos. Scholarly treatments emphasize that the Hebrew term could refer to human or celestial adversaries, and that the definite form, the Satan, often functioned like a title or job description rather than a proper personal name. Even the serpent in the Garden of Eden is not called Satan in Genesis. That identification became influential through later interpretation, especially within Christianity. But it is not stated directly in the original Genesis narrative. This detail surprises many modern readers because centuries of art, sermons, literature, and popular culture have fused several characters together: the serpent, the accuser, the fallen angel, the dragon, Lucifer, and the ruler of demons. The fusion feels ancient because it is familiar, but familiarity is not the same as origin. The devil we recognize was assembled gradually. Between the later books of the Hebrew Bible and the rise of Christianity, Jewish communities experienced conquest, foreign rule, political violence, sectarian conflict, and intense expectations of divine intervention. During the Second Temple period, religious writings increasingly described the world as a battlefield between righteous and wicked powers. Texts outside the later Hebrew Bible developed stories of rebellious angels, corrupting spirits, demonic offspring, and leaders of supernatural opposition. Figures such as Azazel, Mastema, Belial, and others appeared in different works and communities. These were not always identical beings, their roles varied. But the spiritual landscape was changing. The old heavenly accuser was moving toward the position of a cosmic enemy. Why? History may offer part of the answer. When a community experiences oppression but believes that justice belongs to God, the continued success of injustice creates a theological crisis. If God is good and powerful, why do violent empires prosper? Why do faithful people suffer? Why does corruption survive? One response is to move the conflict behind the visible world. The empire is not merely an empire. It participates in a larger rebellion. The persecutor is not merely cruel. He serves a power of darkness. The suffering of the righteous is not evidence that God has lost. It is evidence that the final battle has not yet arrived. This interpretation protects hope. If evil is temporary, organized, and already condemned, then present suffering does not have the last word. But the same idea carries a danger. Once political or religious opponents are identified with cosmic evil, compromise becomes suspicious. A human disagreement becomes a war between light and darkness. The other side is no longer mistaken. It is demonic. This may be one of the devil's most powerful roles in history, not merely explaining suffering, but transforming human enemies into supernatural ones. By the 1st century, early Christian texts presented Satan in a far more developed form. In the gospel traditions, Satan tempts Jesus, opposes the divine mission, and stands behind a kingdom of spiritual resistance. Demonic beings appear as hostile forces from which people seek liberation. In the book of Revelation, the imagery expands into cosmic warfare. A dragon, ancient serpent, deceiver, and adversary opposed by heavenly forces and destined for defeat. Different texts use different images, but later Christian tradition connected them. The accuser became the tempter. The serpent became the dragon. The dragon became the fallen ruler of demons. The result was not merely another monster. It was a complete theory of evil. This devil could explain why people knowingly chose destructive actions. He could explain why truth was rejected, why communities divided, why empires persecuted believers, and why temptation seemed to speak with an intelligence beyond ordinary desire. Yet Christian theology did not generally make Satan equal to God. That distinction matters. In most mainstream Christian thought, Satan is created, limited, and ultimately defeated. He may rebel against divine order, but he is not an eternal power equal to the Creator. This separates Christian thought from strict kamaiktus. The conflict may feel universal, but the outcome is not uncertain. The devil's power is temporary. His greatest weapon is deception, not creation. His influence depends on distortion, turning desire into obsession, authority into domination, fear into hatred, and freedom into self-destruction. Over the centuries, Christian thinkers debated the nature of evil itself. Some treated evil not as an independent substance, but as a corruption or absence of good, much as darkness is the absence of light or disease, the loss of health. This approach helped answer a dangerous theological question. If one good God created everything, did God also create evil? The theory of evil as privation argued that evil has no independent creative essence. It damages what already exists. It twists rather than originates. It consumes rather than builds. The devil, within this framework, is not a second creator. He is a parasite on creation. The philosophical problem remained. If God is powerful, knowing, and good, why is evil permitted at all? That question, the problem of evil, has never received one universally accepted answer. Philosophers and theologians have offered free will, soul-making, the limits of human understanding, the regularity of natural law, and other explanations. Critics have argued that such answers do not fully account for the scale or apparent randomness of suffering. The debate remains open because the question is not merely intellectual. It is asked in hospital rooms, at gravesides after disasters, and in the silence following human cruelty. The devil offers one possible answer. Suffering exists because creation has an enemy. But that answer creates another question. Why would a good and powerful God allow the enemy to act? The supernatural explanation moves the mystery. It does not eliminate it. The familiar visual image of the Christian devil also developed gradually. The Bible does not provide one consistent portrait of a red-horned, goat-legged creature holding a pitchfork. That image emerged from centuries of artistic combination, theological symbolism, folklore, satire, theater, and literature. Different threatening features were gathered from older visual traditions. Animal characteristics expressed the inversion of human reason. Darkness suggested concealment. Distorted bodies represented damaged order. Horns signaled dangerous or untamed power. Wings could be transformed from signs of heavenly status into the anatomy of a fallen being. The devil became visually recognizable because artists needed to make invisible evil visible, but each age redesigned him. In some medieval works, he is grotesque and ridiculous, as well as terrifying, a defeated enemy made ugly by pride. In later literature, he becomes intelligent, persuasive, elegant, even tragic. Sometimes he appears as a monster, sometimes as a gentleman, sometimes as a voice that sounds almost reasonable. That final version may be the most disturbing. A monster announces danger. A persuasive voice can disguise it. The Islamic tradition presents another major figure in this investigation, Iblis. In the Quranic narrative, God commands the heavenly beings to bow before Adam. Iblis refuses. His refusal is connected with pride. He considers himself superior because of the material from which he was created and rejects the honor given to the human being. The central act is not simply violence, it is arrogance. Iblis sees hierarchy where the divine command demands obedience. He measures worth through origin and status. He places his own judgment above God's instruction. After his rejection, he becomes the tempter and enemy of humanity. Yet Islamic theology generally does not grant him unlimited control. He whispers, invites, deceives, and encourages. He cannot force a morally responsible person to obey him. This detail preserves human accountability. A person cannot simply say, "The devil made me do it." Temptation may come from outside, inside, or both, but the decision remains human. The figure of Iblis therefore becomes a warning about pride, self-justification, and the refusal to recognize value in another being. His rebellion begins with comparison. I am better than him. That sentence may be one of the oldest doorways into evil. Islamic traditions also contain complex discussions about whether Iblis should be classified as an angel or a jinn, with different interpretive approaches developing over time. But the Quranic moral pattern remains clear. Pride produces disobedience, disobedience becomes alienation, and alienation becomes a commitment to lead others away from the path. The St. Andrew's Encyclopedia of Theology summarizes an important limitation. Iblis can tempt toward disobedience but cannot coerce, and he does not rule the earth as an equal divine power. Once again, the apparent similarity with the Christian devil conceals major differences. The figures overlap, but they are not interchangeable. That is a repeating lesson throughout this investigation. Humanity does not tell one story of evil. It tells a family of stories. In South Asian religious history, even categories often translated as demons refuse to remain simple. The Asuras of Indian tradition are a powerful example. In some later stories, they appear as opponents of the Devas and are associated with ambition, conflict, or destructive power. But in earlier Vedic uses, the word did not always carry a purely evil meaning. Certain respected divine beings could be described with the term. The moral category changed. A title of power gradually became associated with divine opposition in particular traditions and texts. That shift resembles the transformation of the Greek daimon, though the histories are distinct. Translation often hides these changes by taking a complex ancient word and replacing it with the modern English word, demon. But demon arrives carrying centuries of Christian assumptions. The translation can make foreign traditions look more familiar than they really are. It can also create a false universal pattern. We look across the world, see dozens of translated demons, and conclude that everyone believed in the same beings. Sometimes the similarity exists only in the English word. Buddhism offers an even more radical change in perspective through the figure of Mara. In traditional narratives of the Buddha's awakening, Mara attempts to interrupt the path to enlightenment. Mara threatens, distracts, questions, and tempts. The figure can appear as a mythological being, but Buddhist traditions also interpret Mara as a representation of inner forces. Desire, fear, delusion, attachment, pride, discouragement, and the habits that keep consciousness trapped in suffering. Here, the devil moves inward. The enemy is not merely hiding in a supernatural realm. It operates through the mind's own patterns. Mara does not need to persuade a person to worship evil. Mara needs only to keep the person distracted. Do not look deeply, do not continue. Choose immediate comfort, remain angry, remain afraid. Believe every thought, abandon the path. From this perspective, evil is not always dramatic. It may be repetition, it may be unconscious habit, it may be the endless reconstruction of suffering through craving and ignorance. Some Buddhist sources describe Mara both as a being within religious cosmology and as a powerful metaphor for what obstructs liberation. That ambiguity is not necessarily a contradiction. Myth and psychology can function together. A story places invisible mental conflict on a visible stage. This may explain why temptation stories appear so frequently across religions. Human beings experience internal conflict. We form an intention and then resist it. We know an action may harm us, yet part of us still desires it. We promise to change, then hear an inner argument explaining why change should begin tomorrow. We feel anger rising as if another personality has entered the room. We experience thoughts we did not consciously choose. Modern psychology describes competing motivations, unconscious processes, habits, intrusive thoughts, emotional conditioning, and cognitive bias. Ancient societies used different language. A tempter whispered, a spirit entered, a demon placed an idea in the mind. These explanations are not identical, and it would be simplistic to claim that religious language was merely primitive psychology. For believers, supernatural beings may be real, not metaphors. But from a historical perspective, both systems attempt to describe the same disturbing human experience. The mind is not perfectly unified. We are capable of watching ourselves choose what we believe is wrong. That experience makes the idea of an intelligent tempter emotionally convincing. The tempter gives internal contradiction a voice, but this still does not answer the central mystery. Why do dangerous supernatural agents appear so widely? One possible explanation comes from the way the human brain detects agency. For our ancestors, failing to notice a real predator could be fatal. Mistaking the wind for a predator might cost only a few moments of fear. In uncertain conditions, a system that sometimes detects intention where none exists may be safer than a system that misses intention when it is present. A branch moves in the darkness. Was it the wind or something watching? The nervous system often reacts before conscious reasoning completes the investigation. This does not automatically produce belief in demons. Human cognition is not a simple machine with a devil button. Contemporary research warns against reducing religion to one mental mechanism. Studies of supernatural belief emphasize the interaction of intuitive thought, social learning, personal experience, cultural narratives, and the credibility displayed by trusted people. Children do not invent complete religious systems alone. They learn them from communities. They watch adults pray, sacrifice, fast, avoid taboos, tell stories, and behave as if invisible beings are real. These costly or sincere actions can make beliefs more credible. Research comparing cognitive explanations has found that cultural learning and exposure to such credibility-enhancing behavior can be stronger predictors of supernatural belief than some simple measures of mentalizing ability. In other words, the mind may make supernatural ideas possible. culture teaches the mind which supernatural ideas to believe. Fear alone is also insufficient. People do not merely imagine beings that frighten them. They imagine beings with specific social roles. Some watch, some punish, some protect boundaries, some explain disease, some guard ancestors, some enforce promises, some tempt individuals to violate community values. The supernatural world often resembles an invisible society. It contains rulers, messengers, rebels, judges, criminals, guardians, and outsiders. That may be because human beings understand unfamiliar forces through familiar social structures. A storm has intention, disease is an attacker, misfortune is punishment, a successful harvest is a gift. The universe becomes legible because it behaves like a community of persons. This process may be especially powerful when causes are hidden. Recent cross-cultural research into healing practices has found that supernatural or ritual treatments are more likely to be associated with illnesses whose causes are poorly understood. That pattern makes intuitive sense. When ordinary causal reasoning reaches a wall, supernatural reasoning can continue beyond it. The invisible agent fills the explanatory gap. Before germ theory, a disease could appear to move with intention. It entered one house but spared another. It attacked a child while adults survived. It returned after seeming to disappear. It could not be seen, yet its effects were everywhere. A spirit behaved exactly as an invisible pathogen might appear to behave. This does not mean ancient people were foolish. They were reasoning from the evidence available to them. The tragedy was that the wrong explanation could sometimes lead to harmful responses. But the reasoning itself began with a legitimate observation. Unseen causes are real. Wind is unseen, breath is unseen, infection was unseen, the mind is unseen. A culture that believed invisible things existed was not automatically irrational. The difficult task was identifying which invisible causes were actually present. Another explanation concerns morality and cooperation. Human societies depend on people following rules even when no one is watching. Theft, betrayal, secret violence, deception, and refusal to cooperate can damage a community. But human authorities cannot observe every action. A supernatural watcher solves that problem. You may escape the king, you may deceive your neighbors, you may hide the evidence, but you cannot hide from an invisible judge. Belief in supernatural punishment may therefore strengthen cooperation under certain conditions. Research has explored whether moralizing gods, punitive spirits, ideas of hell, or other supernatural monitors reduce cheating and encourage pro-social behavior. The evidence is complicated. Some experiments and cross-cultural studies support parts of the theory. Other findings show that the effects depend on how supernatural beings are imagined, which behaviors they monitor, and whether punishment is emphasized. Researchers also debate whether large societies produced moralizing supernatural beliefs or whether those beliefs helped large societies expand. The direction of causation may differ across cultures. Still, the social logic is clear. An invisible punisher extends law beyond the reach of the police. And if there is a supernatural enforcer of goodness, there may also be a supernatural intelligence encouraging violation. The devil becomes the anti-law. He does not merely break rules. He persuades others that rules are meaningless, oppressive, or easy to escape. In this role, belief in the devil can stabilize a moral community, but it can also intensify fear, guilt, and suspicion. The same supernatural system that discourages harmful behavior can cause people to interpret accidents as punishment, illness as spiritual failure, or outsiders as agents of corruption. Scientific studies of supernatural punishment therefore reveal both potential cooperative effects and serious limitations. The relationship between religion and moral behavior is not simple, automatic, or uniformly positive. There is also a political explanation. A society defines itself partly by defining what threatens it. Civilization needs a boundary. Inside the boundary are order, purity, truth, law, and identity. Outside are wilderness, pollution, chaos, betrayal, and danger. Supernatural monsters often gather at that border. They live beyond the city wall, beneath the earth, in deserts, ruins, forests, foreign lands, or forbidden spaces. Their bodies combine categories that society prefers to keep separate: human and animal, living and dead, male and female, terrestrial and airborne. The monster violates classification. It does not fit. That is why its appearance feels wrong before it performs any action. The devil becomes the ultimate outsider. the being that rejects the structure of reality itself. But political communities can move that image from myth onto human beings. Foreigners become demons. Religious rivals become servants of darkness. Dissidents become possessed. Minorities become accused of secret rituals. Once that happens, the myth no longer merely explains evil. It authorizes aggression. If the opponent is human, negotiation remains possible. If the opponent is a demon, destruction can be presented as purification. History contains repeated examples of rulers, movements, and institutions describing enemies through supernatural language. The specific targets have changed, but the mechanism remains recognizable. First, a group is accused of hidden corruption. Then, its differences are treated as evidence. Next, ordinary misfortunes are connected to its supposed influence. Finally, violence against the group is reframed as defense against evil. This is why an objective investigation of the devil must examine not only what people feared, but whom they called demonic. A symbol created to explain suffering can become a machine for producing it. This does not mean belief in supernatural evil inevitably causes persecution. Religious traditions also contain powerful warnings against false accusation, hatred, pride, cruelty, and self-righteousness. Many believers understand evil first as something to confront within themselves. The danger begins when certainty about another person's demonic nature replaces evidence, compassion, and moral restraint. The devil can become most politically useful when he is impossible to question. Anyone who doubts the accusation can be accused of serving him. That circular logic protects the story from investigation, and a belief protected from all possible evidence becomes extremely powerful. We now approach the most uncomfortable hypothesis in this documentary. Perhaps human beings repeatedly create devils because a devil can carry guilt that we do not want to recognize as our own. Consider the language people use after committing harm. Something came over me. I was not myself. I lost control. I was influenced. I was only obeying. The act is separated from the person who performed it. This separation can express genuine confusion. Human behavior is shaped by fear, pressure, trauma, habit, ideology, authority, and group influence. People sometimes act in ways that shock even themselves, but supernatural blame can become an escape. If evil belongs entirely to an outside being, the human participant becomes merely a victim. The devil did it. Yet most religious traditions that include a tempter do not completely remove human responsibility. Temptation matters precisely because a choice remains. The devil proposes, the human disposes. This creates a complex moral drama. Evil is both outside and inside. It attacks us, but it also finds something within us that responds. Pride recognizes flattery. Resentment recognizes permission. Fear recognizes a target. Greed recognizes opportunity. The tempter does not always create desire. He reveals where desire already exists. That may be why the most enduring devil stories are not about a monster breaking through a locked door. They are about someone opening it. The bargain with the devil is one of the clearest examples. Across later European folklore and literature, the devil offers wealth, knowledge, power, youth, pleasure, revenge, or artistic ability in exchange for something of ultimate value. The details vary, but the structure remains stable. The human being is not attacked without motive. The human being wants something. The devil's power lies in understanding that desire and removing every moral obstacle around it. The bargain externalizes a real psychological process. People regularly exchange long-term well-being for short-term reward. They sacrifice relationships for ambition, integrity for status, freedom for security, and truth for belonging. No supernatural contract is required, yet the legend makes the exchange visible. A signature appears, a price is named, a deadline approaches. The devil's contract tells us that every desire contains an economic question. What are you willing to pay? This may be one reason modern secular societies have not abandoned devil imagery. Even where literal belief declines, the symbol survives in films, novels, music, advertising, political speech, comedy, and everyday language. We speak of personal demons. We describe technologies as devilish. We say the devil is in the details. We call an advocate for the opposing position the devil's advocate. We imagine dangerous temptation sitting on one shoulder while conscience sits on the other. The figure survives because it performs psychological work. It compresses an entire theory of temptation, consequence, secrecy, and moral conflict into one recognizable character. Science can explain disease without Lamashtu. Astronomy can explain eclipses without Apophis. Meteorology can explain destructive winds without Pazuzu. Psychology can explain many experiences once attributed to possession or temptation. But explanation does not automatically erase symbolism. We may know what causes the storm and still experience it as hostile. We may understand addiction neurologically and still describe it as a demon. We may analyze propaganda scientifically and still call it evil. Knowledge changes the language of causation. It does not eliminate the human need for moral meaning. That distinction matters. Science asks how an event occurs. Religion and philosophy often ask what the event means. Those questions can overlap, but they are not identical. A neurological description of cruelty does not determine whether cruelty is morally wrong. A social explanation for prejudice does not excuse prejudice. A psychological theory of temptation does not tell us what kind of person we should become. The devil survives in the space between mechanism and meaning, and yet modern knowledge has changed the investigation in one decisive way. We now know that some experiences interpreted as supernatural attacks may arise from sleep paralysis, neurological disorders, psychiatric conditions, environmental factors, suggestion, trauma, or culturally shaped expectations. Sleep paralysis is especially revealing. A person becomes conscious while the body remains temporarily unable to move. The chest may feel heavy. The room may seem inhabited. A shadowy presence may be sensed nearby. Fear rises before a clear explanation is available. Across different cultures, the experience has been interpreted through different supernatural beings. The biology may be shared. The face in the room is supplied by culture. This does not prove that every claimed encounter with evil has a natural explanation. Science evaluates specific evidence. It cannot responsibly dismiss every possible claim in advance. But it does demonstrate that intense certainty can emerge from the brain's attempt to interpret ambiguous experience. A person may not merely imagine that something is present. The presence can feel undeniable. This is one of the most important lessons in the entire investigation. Sincerity is not the same as objective verification. People can honestly report what they experienced while disagreeing about what caused it. The respectful response is neither automatic belief nor ridicule. It is careful investigation. What happened? What was perceived? What conditions were present? Are there medical, psychological, environmental, social, or historical explanations? What evidence remains after those possibilities are examined? That method protects two groups at once. It protects believers from mockery, and it protects vulnerable people from having treatable conditions misidentified as supernatural evil. The boundary between faith and evidence requires humility from everyone. There is another modern danger. The devil has entered the age of mass communication. A frightening story that once spread through one village can now reach millions of people in hours. Images are edited, voices are imitated, context disappears, algorithms reward outrage, shock, fear, and certainty. The ancient invisible attacker has found a new environment, not because a supernatural being controls technology, but because the structure of digital communication favors some of the same patterns that devil stories have always used. A hidden enemy, a forbidden secret, a corrupt elite, a coming catastrophe, a battle between absolute good and absolute evil, a promise that only one community knows the truth. These narratives are emotionally powerful because they transform confusion into certainty. Every event becomes connected. Every contradiction becomes proof of deeper deception. Every critic becomes part of the conspiracy. The story cannot fail. If evidence supports it, the story is true. If evidence contradicts it, the enemy must have fabricated the evidence. This is demonology without demons. Its supernatural language may disappear, but its logic remains. That logic offers psychological relief. Randomness is painful. Complex systems are exhausting. A secret enemy is easier to understand than thousands of interacting causes. If one being, group, or force is responsible for everything, the world becomes narratively simple. But moral simplicity can produce factual blindness. History rarely divides cleanly into innocent angels and conscious monsters. Human beings can cause enormous harm while believing they are protecting the good. Institutions can produce suffering without any participant understanding the entire system. Ordinary people can cooperate with injustice through fear, obedience, careerism, silence, or gradual compromise. This is the phenomenon sometimes described as the banality of evil. Not the claim that evil is harmless or ordinary, but the warning that terrible outcomes do not always require theatrical villains. Sometimes they require paperwork. Sometimes they require obedience. Sometimes they require people who refuse to ask what their small action contributes to. A horned monster is easy to reject. A respectable authority giving a convenient order is more difficult. Perhaps that is why the deepest religious warnings about evil focus not only on obvious cruelty, but on pride, deception, self-righteousness, greed, envy, and the gradual hardening of conscience. The devil rarely needs to announce himself if the human being already believes his actions are justified. And now the investigation returns to its opening image. A mother in ancient Mesopotamia hangs the face of Pazuzu near her body, hoping one terrifying power will drive away another. Egyptian priests confront the serpent of chaos so the sun may rise. Persian believers place every truthful word inside a cosmic battle. The Book of Job imagines an accuser questioning whether goodness can survive suffering. Christian texts transform the adversary into a cosmic tempter destined for defeat. Islamic tradition warns that pride can turn devotion into rebellion. Buddhist teaching places Mara at the threshold of awakening, where fear, desire, and doubt make their final attempt to stop the seeker. These are not identical stories, but beneath them lies a shared human confrontation. Something is wrong with the world. Children innocent are harmed. The powerful abuse their position. Nature destroys without moral explanation. The mind betrays its own intentions. Communities turn against themselves. People recognize the good and still choose what damages them. Every civilization must decide how to interpret these facts. Some describe evil as chaos, some as ignorance, some as imbalance, some as falsehood, some as rebellion, some as corrupted desire, some as the absence of good. Some give it a name, some give it a face. The face allows a society to speak about what would otherwise remain invisible, but every face also reveals the society that created it. A culture threatened by disease imagines spirits of infection. A civilization obsessed with order imagines a serpent of chaos. A moral religion imagines an enemy of truth. A path of liberation imagines a tempter who prevents awakening. The devil changes because human fear changes, and yet certain features remain. He is often an intelligence without empathy. He sees human weakness as opportunity. He offers power without responsibility. He promises freedom while producing enslavement. He divides. He accuses. He imitates the good closely enough to make destruction appear reasonable. Whether understood as a literal being, a mythological figure, a psychological symbol, a political instrument, or a combination of these, the devil persists because the questions surrounding him remain unresolved. Why do humans harm one another? Why does suffering strike without justice? Why does knowledge fail to guarantee goodness? Why can a person become cruel while believing himself righteous? Why does every victory over evil seem temporary? No archaeological artifact can answer those questions completely. No brain scan can settle them. No scripture is interpreted in exactly the same way by every believer. No philosophy has ended the debate. The historical evidence can show how ideas developed. It can demonstrate that the modern devil was not present in identical form at the beginning of civilization. It can reveal cultural exchange, changing language, evolving theology, and the psychological needs served by supernatural narratives. But history cannot enter the final chamber. It cannot prove or disprove every metaphysical possibility. That boundary requires honesty. There is no universally accepted scientific evidence demonstrating the existence of a personal supernatural devil. There is also no experiment capable of testing every possible definition of a non-material being operating outside ordinary observation. Science works with detectable evidence and falsifiable claims. Theology and metaphysics address larger frameworks of meaning, existence, and ultimate reality. Conflict begins when either side claims certainty beyond what its method can establish. The believer may see the recurrence of evil beings across cultures as evidence that humanity has encountered a real spiritual enemy. The skeptic may see the same recurrence as evidence that similar brains facing similar dangers create similar stories. The historian may see cultural transmission and adaptation. The psychologist may see agency detection, projection, internal conflict, and social learning. The sociologist may see moral enforcement and group boundaries. These explanations do not always cancel one another. A religious believer can accept psychological mechanisms while maintaining a spiritual interpretation. A skeptic can recognize the moral value of religious symbolism without accepting its supernatural claims. The evidence permits more than one philosophical reading, but it does not permit every factual claim. Legends must be identified as legends. Interpretations must be identified as interpretations. Historical evidence must remain separate from doctrine. Personal experience must not automatically become universal proof. That discipline protects both reason and belief. Perhaps the final clue has been hidden in plain sight. Humanity rarely creates a devil who is completely alien. He is usually made from familiar pieces. The intelligence of a human, the appetite of a predator, the status of a fallen ruler, the pride of an offended servant, the envy of a rival, the language of a lawyer, the promises of a merchant, the tactics of a politician, the patience of a hunter. We construct the supernatural enemy from qualities we already know. That may be because evil is easiest to imagine when it resembles us. The devil is horrifying not simply because he is inhuman. He is horrifying because he is human ability without human compassion, intelligence without wisdom, freedom without responsibility, desire without limit, power without love. And that leads to the darkest possibility of all. What if the reason civilizations repeatedly imagined demons is not that evil always came from outside humanity? What if it is because humanity repeatedly discovered evil within itself and could not bear to look at it directly? A monster becomes a mirror turned sideways. We see the shape but not our own reflection. We place cruelty in the wilderness, pride in a fallen angel, deception in a serpent, and temptation in a whispering spirit. Then we tell ourselves that evil belongs somewhere else. But the most mature versions of these traditions refuse that escape. They warn that the outer enemy gains power through the inner weakness. Chaos enters where order is neglected. Falsehood grows where truth becomes inconvenient. Pride rises where humility is abandoned. Hatred expands where another person is stripped of humanity. Mara succeeds when attention collapses. Iblis succeeds when superiority becomes identity. The tempter succeeds when desire is protected for examination. The accuser succeeds when condemnation replaces mercy. Whether the devil exists as a literal being may remain a matter of faith, but the forces symbolized by the devil are visible. Deception is real. Cruelty is real. Pride is real. Corruption is real. The transformation of fear into hatred is real. The ability to justify harm while calling it good is real. Those facts do not require supernatural belief. They require awareness. The most important question may therefore not be whether an ancient demon once stood outside the first human city. It may be whether the stories of demons were trying to warn us about something that still stands inside every city today. Something that waits wherever people stop questioning their certainty. Something that grows wherever power is separated from responsibility. Something that speaks whenever we decide that another human being is no longer worthy of compassion. For thousands of years, humanity has searched for the birthplace of the devil. Perhaps we have been looking in the wrong place. Perhaps the devil first appeared at the moment a conscious being understood the difference between suffering and mercy, and chose suffering for someone else. Or perhaps, as billions of believers across history have maintained, that choice is encouraged by an intelligence older than civilization itself. The historical record cannot close the case. It can only show us how long the question has followed us. So what do you believe? Are demons and devils cultural images created to explain fear, suffering, disease, and the divided human mind? Are they distorted memories of a genuine spiritual reality, or are both possibilities connected in a way we still do not understand? Share your interpretation in the comments. And subscribe to The Last Belief, where we continue investigating the mysteries of history, religion, culture, and the greatest unanswered questions of human existence. Because sometimes the beliefs we leave behind reveal more about us than the answers we find.